The 64th gate, before completion. The gate of confusion. In the head center, pointed towards its harmonic gate in the ajna center, the 47, the gate of oppression, and together they form the definition of the channel of abstraction, a design of mental activity and clarity. Mental activity and clarity. And the clarity is something that's a very important word, because clarity is a keynote for the way in which the emotional system can operate as a true authority. In other words, that the emotional system, this is not about awareness, this is about the development of emotional clarity, and emotional clarity comes with wading through the wave and being able to sample the wave and finally come to an understanding and coming to a sense of, what a decision should be based on that clarity. And clarity in that sense speaks for recognition that, rarely is ever 100%. This is if you've got 70 or 80% clear about something, that's often as far as you're going to go, because there is no absolute in that sense, as there is within the logic construct. Here we're dealing with an abstract process, and dealing with an abstract process, we are dealing with a sensing process. The 64th gate is a very different kind of mental pressure. It is a pressure to interpret in one way or another, and out of that interpretation to develop a concept out of the past and out of past experience. And everything about the abstract process is rooted in this identification with the mystery of the past. The mystery of the past experience. And of course, I'm not just talking about being fascinated by historical past. I'm talking about personal past. This is the gate of confusion. And it is a gate of confusion in that, experience is something that, depending on how it's been seen, what the perspective is, that making sense out of an experience is very, very difficult. That's why we speak in terms of clarity. Imagine what that is like within the context of an emotional being. If you're high on your emotional wave and you watch something, a film, for example, there is a pleasure that you're going to derive from it that's basically associated to where you are in your wave. And so when you describe it to somebody else, you describe it through that filter. And yet, if you experience the same film at the low end, in other words, that there was a different coloring to the way in which you perceived it, then your experiences of it is different, and the way that you would share that experience would be different with the other. Well, this is the same thing for the abstract mind. In other words, the dilemma, the confusion is not the confusion in the sense that, they don't know what to make of something. The confusion is that there's so many things you could make of it. And of course, this is really the dilemma. The other thing is to be able to distinguish between what is the subjective appraisal of an experience and the objective appraisal of an experience. All of this is part of the pressure that is there in the 64th gate. And it's one of the things that makes the abstract process so fascinating. Because the abstract process, rather than looking for this, closed, strict, restricted pattern, that the abstract process sees the potential diversity in everything. It sees the possibilities in that sense in everything. And so where logic leads to a fixed, hard opinion, the abstract leads to an idea. and that you can really begin to see the fundamental differences between the abstract mind and the logical mind. If you have the 64th gate in an open ajna center, this can lead to a lot of psychological problems, because of course this need to make sense out of something and the power of that, because this is a pressure center, if it's only coming intermittently, it can be very difficult to deal with. You know, the sense that suddenly that there's something wrong, suddenly there's something that you have to think about. You know, you get all wrapped up in it, and then the transit goes away and it all goes flat, and one wonders what that was all about. And you can have this sense of feeling quite insecure on the mental plane. So keep in mind something about this 64th gate. It's not confused. It isn't. But the process of distilling the experience, this is difficult. And if you're somebody that has the 64th gate, you know, if you're operating correctly, you know, then you will benefit from an aligned perspective and you will find your clarity. The 63rd gate, after completion, in the head center, pointed down towards the ajna center to its harmonic gate, the 4th gate, youthful folly, forming the channel of logic, a design of mental ease mixed with doubt. And it's interesting to really think about that mental ease mixed with doubt. Of the three channels that operate between the head center and the ajna center, this is the only one that has this mental ease. This is the benefit of logic. That is, that the logic process is something that can be very soothing. Now, the head center is a pressure center. It's a pressure center, so there is this logical pressure that is always there. And one of the things about the nature of logic that makes logic so special is that logic can be satisfied. In other words, part of logic's circuitry is the 1858, the channel of, not being satisfied, that is always seeking satisfaction, so that satisfaction logically is always possible. You know, discovering that 1 and 1 equals 2 and recognizing that that will never change gives one a sense of security and satisfaction in that one does not have to doubt this. This is something that has suddenly become reliable and consistent. And logic is always looking for the reliable and consistent pattern, because this provides logic with what it seeks, that is, security in the future. In other words, to be able to project the pattern forward. Now, the gift of the 63rd gate, again, this is a pressure gate, is that the 63rd gate, in a way, filters all experience, looking for patterns that are not satisfying. I mean, it's not so much it's doing that consciously, obviously, but this is the process that's taking place. And what we call doubt, because that is what the 63rd gate brings us, is this finding out a pattern that is just not satisfying. Doesn't mean that the pattern doesn't even work. I mean, that's the obvious. But a pattern that's just not satisfying. You know, it doesn't leave one with the sense of, okay, I've got that, it's clear, I don't need to be concerned about it, I don't have to doubt it. You know, so everything about the 63rd gate is that the 63rd gate is bringing this pressure to doubt. Now look, the head center is the least defined of all centers. Only 30% of human beings have the head center defined. So what that means is that in most cases, the 63rd gate, this gate of doubt, is operating in an undefined head center. And this is when this gate becomes a pressure that can become very, very uncomfortable. Because, of course, like all centers, the moment that the open head center is defined, defined by planetary imprint or defined by somebody's aura, immediately this whole process inflates, and a doubt can be something that is, literally the mountain that's arisen out of a molehill. The tiny little thing that could become inflated into an enormous doubt, and a doubt that can distort, and a doubt that can be obsessive, and can deny somebody even a chance to see the benefits of a pattern. That doubt can be very powerful. The other thing is it doesn't stay. It's conditioned one moment and then it's gone. For those who have it defined. That is, the 63rd gate defined, whether it's defined directly to its harmonic, the fourth gate, or in a defined head center through the other channels, that there is a consistent process. And it is this consistent process that actually can successfully filter out, those dissatisfying patterns, and that there is legitimate doubt that can be attached to them. Now, of course, what the doubt is truly seeking is to pressure the mind, what we can really refer to as our neocortex, to think this thing through, to work over the pattern and to find out whether the doubt is legitimate or not. There is no judgment being made by the discovery of the doubt. The other thing is that the 63rd gate, like the 64th gate, like the 61st gate, that the head center, in a way, these gates are poorly connected to the mundane process. They're furthest away, in a sense, from the true inner authority of a human being. They tend to be outside of the body, in a sense. And in that way, beings that have the 63rd gate or the 64th gate defined, that so often they're very mindy and they're not really connected to their life. And that the very doubts that they can be puzzling over, the very formulas that they can be looking for, don't bring any value to the quality of their life. So the 63rd gate, if it's operating in your design in an undefined head center, remember, if your mind is your inner authority, these doubts are going to become problems for you. But if you're operating through your true authority, then everything will operate correctly. The 64th gate, before completion, the gate of confusion. In the head center, pointed towards its harmonic gate in the Ajna center, the 47, the gate of oppression, and together they form the definition of the channel of abstraction, a design of mental activity and clarity. Mental activity and clarity. And the clarity is something that's a very important word, because clarity is a keynote for the way in which the emotional system can operate as a true authority. In other words, that the emotional system, this is not about awareness, this is about the development of emotional clarity, and emotional clarity comes with wading through the wave and being able to sample the wave and finally come to an understanding, coming to a sense of, what a decision should be based on that clarity. And clarity, in that sense, speaks for recognition that, rarely is ever 100%. This is if you've got 70 or 80% clear about something, that's often as far as you're going to go, because there is no absolute in that sense, as there is within